I came home buzzing with excitement after the reading of my grandmother's will. Big Mama Josephine had just left me $10 million and a sprawling estate in Aspen. I could not wait to tell my husband Marcus that our financial worries were finally over. But when I pulled into our driveway, my husband and my mother-in-law were waiting on the porch with my packed bags and divorce papers. Marcus threw the papers at my feet. "Sign them. The house is sold. You are homeless now." Beatrice smirked. "Go back to the ghetto." I did not cry. I just looked at the papers, looked up at their smug faces, and smiled. Marcus frowned. "What is so funny?" "Actually, the house you just sold belongs to." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who severely underestimated your worth. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and I work as a public relations crisis manager. My entire career is built on cleaning up other people, us massive disasters, spinning terrible situations into victories, and outsmarting the most ruthless people in the corporate world. I am paid to stay calm when everything is burning to the ground. But the one crisis I had been failing to manage was my own marriage. I had spent the last 5 years trying to prove my worth to Marcus, and more importantly to his mother Beatrice. Beatrice was a woman completely obsessed with respectability politics. To her, image was everything. She prided herself on being part of the Buckhead elite, attending the right charity galas, knowing the right local politicians, and looking down her nose at anyone who did not have a trust fund or a prestigious family pedigree. She never missed an opportunity to remind me that I came from a working-class neighborhood, raised by a single mother and a tough, loving grandmother. She viewed my presence in her family as a stain on their pristine reputation, a constant reminder that her precious son had settled for someone she deemed socially unfit. But Beatrice did not know Big Mama Josephine. Nobody in their circle really did. My grandmother worked as a housekeeper back in the 1970s, but she was incredibly sharp. She saved every penny, listened to the wealthy folks she worked for, and quietly bought up land in Colorado long before it became a playground for billionaires. When Big Mama passed away, I thought I was just going to a routine lawyer-us office to collect a few sentimental family heirlooms. Instead, I walked out as a multimillionaire. The drive back to my house felt like a dream. I was clutching the steering wheel, tears of joy and disbelief welling in my eyes. Marcus and I had been struggling lately. Or rather, Marcus had been struggling. He liked to play the big shot investor, always wearing custom-tailored suits and driving leased luxury cars to impress his friends and his arrogant brother-in-law, Chad. I thought this inheritance would finally ease the heavy tension in our home. I thought we could pay off the secret debts I knew he was hiding. I thought we could finally start over. I turned my car onto our manicured street, my mind racing with plans. But as I pulled into our wide paved driveway, my heart dropped into my stomach. There, sitting haphazardly on the front porch steps, were my 3 suitcases. Not just any bags, but the designer luggage set Marcus had bought me for our anniversary, now stuffed to the brim with my clothes carelessly spilling out of the zippers. I parked the car and slowly stepped out. The heavy, humid Atlanta air suddenly felt suffocating. Standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto their property, were Marcus and Beatrice. Beatrice was wearing one of her signature silk blouses, a strand of pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. Her arms were crossed, and a look of pure, unadulterated triumph stretched across her face. Marcus stood beside her, his jaw set tight. He was trying to look imposing, but to me he mostly just looked like a little boy, hiding behind his mother-used skirt. I walked up the pathway, my eyes darting from my scattered belongings to my husband. My mind instantly shifted from loving wife into crisis management mode. I read their body language. The crossed arms, the elevated physical position on the stairs, the bags acting as a physical barricade. This was an ambush. "Marcus," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the pounding in my chest. "What is going on? Why are my bags outside?" Marcus did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket, pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, and tossed them down the stairs. They landed right next to my shoes. "Divorce papers," he said coldly. "Sign them. I am done." I stared at the papers, then back at the man I had vowed to spend my life with. "Done?" I asked quietly. "Just like that. You pack my bags while I am at my grandmother Uswell reading." Beatrice let out a sharp, theatrical sigh. "Oh, please, Nia. Let us not drag this out with your usual working-class dramatics." Marcus has finally woken up and realized he deserves a woman of his own caliber. Someone who understands our world. Not someone who smells like a discount department store. "We have tolerated your presence long enough." I ignored her completely, keeping my focus entirely on Marcus. "You want a divorce? Fine, but this is my house too. I am going inside to get the rest of my things properly." I reached down to grab one of my bags, but Marcus stepped forward, aggressively blocking the doorway. "No, it is not," he stated, a cruel smirk, finally breaking through his stoic expression. "You do not live here anymore. I sold the house this morning. The paperwork is finalized. The buyers are taking possession by the end of the month, and I am not spending another single night under the same roof as you." My brain quickly processed his words. Sold the house. How could he possibly sell a house in a matter of hours, especially while I was gone? Beatrice took a step down toward me, her eyes glittering with absolute malice. "You heard him. The house is sold. The money is going toward Marcus's new business ventures. It is time for you to leave our neighborhood. Grab your little bags and call a cab. Go back to the ghetto where you belong. Maybe you can use whatever pennies your grandmother left you to rent a nice little shack." For a long, heavy moment, there was absolute silence on the porch. The kind of tense silence that happens right before a hurricane makes landfall. I looked down at the divorce papers resting on the concrete. I looked at the expensive luggage they had so carelessly tossed outside like trash. And then I thought about the $10 million and the Aspen estate waiting for me in my newly established trust. I thought about the frantic phone call I had received from a private investigator I had hired weeks ago when Marcus started acting suspicious. They expected me to cry. They expected me to fall to my knees, to beg Marcus to reconsider, to scream and shout, and give Beatrice the immense satisfaction of seeing the angry, unrefined woman she always claimed I was. But I did not shed a single tear. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I let out a soft chuckle. The chuckle grew into a laugh, rich and loud, echoing across their perfectly manicured lawn. Beatrice's triumphant smirk instantly faltered. She took a step back, exchanging a confused, slightly panicked look with Marcus. My reaction was not in their script. "What is so funny?" Marcus demanded, his voice suddenly losing its confident edge. "Have you lost your mind?" I stopped laughing, but the smile remained sharp and dangerous. I slowly bent down, picked up the divorce papers, and dusted them off. "Oh, I will gladly sign these, Marcus. In fact, you just did me the biggest favor of my entire life. But there is one tiny little problem with your brilliant master plan." Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What problem?" I looked him dead in the eye, dropping my voice to a cold whisper that cut through the humid air like a blade. "You sold the house. Interesting. Because the house you just sold does not belong to you, Marcus." Marcus let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed off the brick facade of the home we had shared. He took a step forward, his chest puffed out in that aggressive posture he always used to intimidate me. "You are completely delusional, Nia. I have the power of attorney. You signed it last year during our tax filings. I literally have the executed contract from Crescent Holdings right here." He slapped the thick folder against his palm. $2.5 million. Cash. The title company cleared it. The lawyers approved it. You do not own a single brick of this property anymore. Beatrice chimed in, her voice dripping with that familiar, sickeningly sweet condescension she reserved exclusively for me. "Oh, Marcus, do not be too hard on her. People from her background simply do not understand complex real estate transactions. They are used to renting month to month. Let the poor girl gather her cheap clothes and leave before I call the neighborhood security. She cannot help that she lacks the pedigree required to understand elite financial matters." The camera slowly tracks around me in a smooth, continuous circle, capturing the absolute stillness of my posture against their frantic arrogance. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I reached into my designer blazer, pulling out my phone. The screen was already glowing with the official state registry documents. You really should read the fine print before you try to steal from a woman who cleans up corporate messes for a living, I said quietly, holding the screen up so the bright backlight illuminated Marcus' face in the humid evening air. Big Mama Josephine did not just leave me a house. She left it in the Josephine Trust. An irrevocable trust. Your little fraudulent power of attorney means absolutely nothing because I do not personally own the house. The trust does, and I am the sole trustee. Marcus squinted at the screen, his jaw tightening as the legal jargon began to register. But I was not finished. The camera pushes in slowly on my face, isolating my expression from the manicured lawn behind me. And as for Crescent Holdings, I continued taking a deliberate step closer to him, forcing him to step back. Did you really think a massive investment firm would randomly offer double the market value for a house in this specific zip code in cash within 48 hours? Crescent Holdings is a Delaware-registered LLC. I set it up 3 weeks ago. I am the sole managing member. You went behind my back, forged documents, and sold my grandmother's house right back to me. The blood drained completely from Marcus's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for gravity to take over. Beatrice grabbed his arm, her perfect composure finally cracking. Her voice spiked an octave higher. What is she talking about, Marcus? Tell me she is lying. You said the lawyers vetted everything. You promised me this would fund my new country club membership. Before Marcus could formulate a lie to soothe his mother, a pair of blinding LED headlights swept across the porch. The aggressive guttural roar of a twin-turbo engine shattered the quiet suburban evening. A sleek, midnight black Porsche Panamera jerked to a halt in our driveway, tires violently crunching the decorative gravel. The camera smoothly glides away from my face, tilting down to follow the sharp opening of the car doors. Out stepped Chloe Marcus, us younger sister, clutching a limited edition Birkin bag like a shield. She wore designer sunglasses despite the sun having set an hour ago, the ultimate symbol of her desperate need to look wealthy. From the driver-us side emerged her husband Chad. Chad was the family U.S. golden ticket, a white hedge fund broker who loved to throw his weight around at our family dinners, constantly masking his racial microaggressions as financial advice. He wore his signature Patagonia fleece vest over a tailored dress shirt, looking every bit the arrogant Wall Street stereotype he was. Beatrice had always worshipped Chad, treating him as the ultimate validation of her family-us upward mobility and their ticket into the highest echelons of society. Chad slammed his car door, his eyes immediately locking onto the tension on the porch. He bounded up the steps, completely ignoring me, and marched straight to Marcus. The camera tracks his movement, staying low to emphasize his overbearing presence. "What is the holdup?" Marcus Chad demanded, his tone clipped and impatient. "Chloe told me you were kicking her out today. We have dinner reservations at the club in 20 minutes, and I want to toast to the new capital." Beatrice practically threw herself at her son-in-law. "Chad, thank goodness you are here. This crazy girl is spouting nonsense. She is claiming the house belongs to a trust and that she is the one who bought it. Tell Marcus she is lying. You handled the wire transfers." Chad finally turned his gaze toward me. He looked me up and down, a patronizing smirk playing on his lips. It was the same look he gave me at Thanksgiving when he told me public relations was a cute little hobby for a woman. He reached out and snatched the folder of documents from Marcus' limp hands. "Nia, Nia, Nia." Chad sighed, shaking his head as if dealing with a stubborn toddler. "This is why you should leave high-level finance to the professionals. You think you pulled a fast one because you set up a shell company. You think you are starring in some legal thriller. I think I caught my husband committing federal wire fraud," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "And I think you helped him do it." Chloe scoffed from the bottom of the stairs, crossing her arms. "Do not talk to my husband like that. Chad manages millions of dollars before breakfast. You just write apology tweets for canceled celebrities. You are embarrassing yourself." Chad held up a hand, silencing his wife without looking at her. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumbs flying across the screen. The camera circles to capture his smug profile against the dark sky. "You see, Nia, you might be smart enough to register an LLC," Chad said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you are completely ignorant about how escrow and wire transfers actually execute. When your little fake company initiated the purchase, you had to fund the escrow account. Real money. $2.5 million of your inheritance money." He took a step closer to me, aggressively invading my personal space. The camera pushes in tight on the glowing screen of his phone, then pans up to his mocking blue eyes. "You authorized the release of those funds to close the trap on Marcus." Chad continued, his smile widening into a predatory grin. "But you forgot who was routing the transaction. The money did not go into a joint account. It went directly into an offshore corporate account that Marcus and I control. The transfer cleared exactly 14 minutes ago. The transaction is fully executed and legally binding." He shoved his phone right into my line of sight. The banking app displayed a confirmed incoming wire of $2.5 million. Marcus suddenly stood taller, his confidence rushing back as he realized Chad had seemingly saved him. Chad let out a short, triumphant laugh, tossing the folder back onto my scattered luggage. "You tried to be clever, but you just played yourself. You voluntarily wired your own grandmother us inheritance into our hands. The sale is final. You do not own the house anymore, and your money is gone. You are completely broke, Nia. Now grab your cheap bags and get off my brother-in-law us property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Chad's mocking grin seemed to freeze in time, blurring and shifting until it morphed into that exact same arrogant expression from 6 months ago. The cold air of the porch faded, replaced instantly by the overwhelming scent of roasted turkey, candied yams, and expensive sage stuffing. It was Thanksgiving Day at Beatrice U.S. sprawling estate in Buckhead. The dining room was a masterclass in aggressive wealth, featuring a glittering crystal chandelier, heavy mahogany furniture, and perfectly polished silver that caught the light from the roaring fireplace. Beatrice orchestrated family gatherings like a military general, positioning her troops for maximum psychological impact. That afternoon, she stood at the head of the long table, directing everyone to their seats with a stiff smile. When I stepped into the room wearing a brand new emerald green silk dress that I had saved up for to celebrate a recent promotion at my firm, Beatrice immediately stepped in my path. She placed a cold hand on my shoulder and guided me away from the main dining area toward the attached sunroom. "Nia, dear, we are just a bit tight on space at the main table this year," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with fake maternal concern. "You do not mind sitting out here with Chloe's twins, do you? You are always so good with the children." Before I could protest, she had already turned her back, walking over to Chad. She practically glided across the Persian rug to pull out the heavy, ornate chair directly to her right, the seat of absolute honor. Chad sank into the chair with a satisfied sigh, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt. Beatrice patted his shoulder affectionately, announcing to the entire room that Chad was the family U.S. absolute financial savior. She went on a 10-minute monologue about how his brilliant hedge fund strategies were elevating the family portfolio, ensuring their legacy for generations to come. I sat in the sunroom, wedged between two screaming toddlers, sticky fingers grabbing at the hem of my dress. I could see the main table through the glass French doors. I watched them pass the wine, laugh at Chad, us mediocre jokes, and toast to their own perceived greatness. I was entirely isolated, physically and emotionally walled off from the family I had married into. After an hour of cutting up turkey into tiny pieces for the twins, I stood up to refill their water pitcher from the main dining room. I smoothed down my green silk dress, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves before walking through the glass doors. The adults were in the middle of a loud conversation about a new country club membership. Beatrice was holding a massive crystal goblet filled to the brim with a dark, heavy Cabernet. As I walked past her chair to reach the buffet table, Beatrice suddenly stood up, spinning around with violent abruptness. She did not even try to make it look like an accident. The deep red wine splashed violently across the front of my dress, soaking instantly into the delicate emerald silk. The cold liquid seeped through to my skin, and a collective gasp echoed around the dining table. I froze, staring down at the massive dark stain, ruining the only nice piece of clothing I had bought for myself in a year. "Oh my goodness," Beatrice exclaimed, pressing a hand to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "I am so terribly sorry, Nia. I simply did not see you sneaking up behind me like that. But do not fret too much. I suppose those cheap silk blends you buy from those discount outlet stores absorb liquid rather quickly. You can probably just throw it in the regular wash with a little bleach. It is not like it is designer." Chloe let out a sharp, muffled snort of laughter, covering her mouth with her napkin. I did not look at Beatrice. I did not look at Chloe. I looked directly across the table at my husband. Marcus was sitting right there. He had a prime view of his mother intentionally humiliating his wife. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to hand me a napkin. I waited for him to say a single word in my defense to tell his mother she had crossed a line. Marcus picked up his heavy silver knife and fork. He cut a small piece of honey-glazed ham. He placed it in his mouth, chewed slowly, and stared intensely at his plate. He swallowed his food in absolute cowardly silence. He chose his mother us comfort over his wife us dignity, just like he always did. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with the tension of my public humiliation. That was when Chad decided to chime in, leaning back in his antique chair and swirling the amber bourbon in his glass. He looked at me with that same patronizing smirk he was wearing right now on my front porch. "Do not worry about the dress," Nia, Chad drawled, his voice booming across the quiet room. "Public relations is a tough gig. Writing little apology statements for canceled celebrities and managing social media disasters pays absolute peanuts, right? You are practically doing charity work." He took a slow, arrogant sip of his bourbon, shaking his head in mock sympathy. "Listen, if you ever want to make some real adult money, let me know. I can teach you a few basic things about high-yield investments, give you a little introductory course on how capital actually works, maybe help you get out of the discount clothing aisles and buy something nice for a change." I stood completely still, the cold wine sticking to my chest. I grabbed a cloth napkin from the buffet table and began calmly dabbing at the stain. I did not yell. I did not run out of the room crying. My public relations training kicked in instantly. When dealing with a hostile entity, you never show weakness. You find their vulnerability and you press hard. I tossed the stained napkin onto the silver tray and met Chad's mocking blue eyes. "I genuinely appreciate the offer, Chad," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying clearly across the room. "But I prefer keeping my assets liquid, transparent, and legally compliant. I would absolutely hate to get tangled up in highly leveraged collateralized debt obligations, especially now that the Securities and Exchange Commission is aggressively cracking down on synthetic crypto derivatives that lack underlying utility and deliberately obscure investor risk." The color drained from Chad's face so fast he looked physically ill. He choked on his bourbon, coughing violently into his hand. The smug superiority vanished from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, sudden panic. He stared at me, realizing in a fraction of a second that I was not the ignorant working-class girl he thought I was. He realized I knew exactly what kind of unregulated, high-risk financial garbage his firm was secretly peddling. The dining room fell into a dead silence, broken only by the sound of Chad hacking violently into his linen napkin. His face had turned the color of an overripe plum. Beatrice rushed to his side, patting his back with frantic, desperate hands, while glaring at me as if I had just physically assaulted her favorite child. Chad slammed his crystal glass down so hard the bourbon sloshed over the rim and stained the pristine white tablecloth. He glared at me, his chest heaving. He did not have a smart comeback. He did not have a condescending financial metaphor to put me back in my place. He simply shoved his heavy mahogany chair back with a screech that echoed off the high ceilings and stormed out of the dining room. Marcus scrambled to his feet, practically knocking over his own wineglass. He threw his napkin onto his plate and rushed out after his brother-in-law, completely abandoning me in a room full of staring, hostile relatives. I stood there, the sticky wine drying on my ruined dress, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. I excused myself, politely ignoring Beatrice's furious muttering, and walked out into the wide, dimly lit hallway. I was heading towards the guest bathroom to clean myself up when I heard the voices. They were coming from Beatrice's private oak-paneled study at the end of the corridor. The heavy wooden doors were left open just a crack, spilling a thin sliver of yellow light across the marble floor. I stopped walking. I pressed my back against the cool, patterned wallpaper, slipping into the shadows just outside the doorframe. My crisis management instincts took over. Information was power, and right now the two men who held the keys to my marital misery were panicking. Chada's voice was a vicious, restrained hiss. "You need to get your wife under control, Marcus. She is running her mouth at the dinner table talking about the SEC and crypto regulations. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is right now? If she starts digging into where our capital is moving, we are both going to end up in a federal penitentiary." I heard the sound of pacing footsteps followed by Marcus Yu's voice. It was not the arrogant, demanding tone he used with me. It was high-pitched, thin, and trembling with absolute panic. He was groveling. "I am sorry, Chad. I do not know why she said that. She is just trying to sound smart. I promise she does not know anything. Just please give me a little more time. I can fix this. I just need a few more weeks to get the capital together." Chad let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Time. You do not have time, Marcus. The crypto market just took a massive dive, and your little leveraged positions got completely liquidated. You owe me $800,000. Cash. My partners are asking questions about the missing funds. I covered for you because you are family, but I am not going down for your stupid gambling addiction. I want my money." I stood frozen in the dark hallway. $800,000. My husband, the man who constantly berated my career and scrutinized my grocery bills, had gambled away nearly $1 million on unregulated digital currency. He was not a sophisticated investor. He was an addict in a custom suit, and Chad was his enabler. "I do not have $800,000 in cash," Chad Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "You know my accounts are tied up. Beatrice cannot liquidate her trust without penalty. Please, man, you have to give me an extension. I am not a bank, Marcus. I am your lifeline, and I am cutting you off," Chad snapped. The sharp sound of a fist slamming against a wooden desk echoed through the study. "You want to pay me back. You sell that house you are living in." "But the house is not in my name," Marcus argued, his panic rising. "Nia inherited it from her grandmother. It is tied to some trust." "I do not care if it is tied to the King of England," Chad growled. "You are her husband. You have access to her documents. You get a power of attorney drawn up. You tell her it is for a joint tax filing or a property insurance update. You slide the document right into the middle of a stack of boring paperwork, and you make sure she signs it. Once you have that power of attorney, you execute a quick sale to a cash buyer. You pay me my $800,000, and you keep the rest to float your failing portfolio." Marcus hesitated. "If she finds out, she will destroy me. She knows people in the media." "She is a public relations girl," Chad said, dripping with disgust. "She is not a lawyer. She is not a financial auditor. By the time she realizes the house is sold, the money will be offshore and there will be nothing she can do. You either get me my money by the end of the month, Marcus, or I am going to the authorities and telling them you embezzled the funds from my firm. You will be in a federal cell before Christmas." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and deeply revealing. I waited for Marcus to defend me. I waited for him to say he would never steal from his wife, to say he would find another way to pay his debts. "Okay," Marcus finally whispered. "Okay. I will get the papers drawn up. I will get her to sign them." I did not gasp. I did not storm into the room and flip the desk. I did not scream at my husband for plotting to steal my inheritance to cover his massive gambling debts. I simply stepped back further into the shadows. The anger that should have burned hot and reckless inside my chest completely crystallized into something ice-cold and incredibly sharp. They thought I was just a naive girl from the wrong side of the tracks. They thought my career was a cute hobby. They thought they could use my signature to rob me blind and leave me homeless, while they sipped premium bourbon and laughed at my expense. I turned around and walked silently back down the hallway, leaving them to their desperate, pathetic plotting. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea that a crisis manager does not just react to a fire. She redirects the flames right back at the arsonist. The very next morning, the sun was barely rising over the Atlanta skyline. I sat at the glass desk in my home office, a fresh cup of black coffee steaming next to my laptop. The house was dead quiet. Marcus was still sleeping off his Thanksgiving hangover, completely unaware that the countdown to his absolute destruction had just begun. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a private number I kept for extreme corporate emergencies. It rang twice before a deep professional voice answered. "Robert speaking." "Robert, it is Nia," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative. "I need you to draft documents for a Delaware limited liability company immediately. Yes, a complete shell company with maximum privacy protections. Expedite the filing." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Everything all right, Nia? What are we acquiring?" I took a slow sip of my dark coffee, watching the morning light catch the expensive wedding ring on my left hand. "Everything is perfect, Robert," I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. "It is just time for me to buy a house." The memory of that morning in my home office fades away, leaving me standing right back in the humid night air of Atlanta. The camera smoothly pulls back from my face, establishing a steady, continuous orbit around the tense standoff on the front porch. I am surrounded by my carelessly packed luggage, facing the four people who conspired to ruin me. Marcus stands rigid still, trying to process the revelation about the shell company. Chloe clutches her designer bag, her mouth slightly open. But Beatrice is not finished. She refuses to be outsmarted by someone she considers entirely beneath her social station. Beatrice steps aggressively forward, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the slate tiles. She points a manicured finger directly at my chest. Her voice rises, echoing across the perfectly manicured lawns of the wealthy neighborhood. She tells me that my little corporate trick means absolutely nothing. She screams that I am a parasite, a working-class freeloader who leeched off her son for 5 long years. She proudly declares that she was the one who orchestrated this entire sale, boasting that pushing Marcus to sell the property was the only way to sever the heavy dead weight holding their family back from true greatness. She tells me I will never belong in Buckhead, that I lack the pedigree, the breeding, and the grace required to exist in their elite circles. She stands tall, a smug look of absolute victory washing over her face, waiting for me to break down and cry. I do not move a single muscle. The camera continues its slow circle, capturing the absolute calm in my posture against the frantic, desperate energy of my mother-in-law. I let her finish her entire hateful monologue. I let the silence hang in the air for 3 full seconds. Then I raise my phone. "You talk entirely too much, Beatrice," I say, my voice completely steady. "And you are incredibly careless with who you invite into your home." I tap the screen of my phone. A crisp, clear audio recording begins to play at maximum volume, cutting through the quiet suburban night. It is Beatrice speaking. Her voice is unmistakable, recorded just 48 hours ago in the very sunroom where she once intentionally ruined my silk dress. The audio captures her speaking to Marcus, complaining about the exorbitant cost of loyalty. The recording is devastatingly clear. Beatrice explicitly details how she drove to a less reputable side of town, withdrew $10,000 in unbanded cash, and handed it directly to a corrupt notary public named Harold. She laughs on the recording, mocking how incredibly easy it was for Harold to forge my signature on the power of attorney documents. She brags about bypassing the legal system, stating that a little bit of cash can fix any problem when you are dealing with desperate working-class people. The recording ends with a sharp click. The transformation on the porch is instantaneous and severe. Beatrice loses every ounce of her color. Her face turns ash white, and the smug superiority completely vanishes, replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. She looks like a woman who has just watched the floor drop out from underneath her. She takes a stumbling step backward, her hand flying to her chest, clutching her pearls as she struggles to draw breath. Chloe gasps loudly, physically backing away from her mother, as if Beatrice has suddenly caught a contagious disease. Marcus looks paralyzed, his eyes darting frantically between his mother and my phone. For a moment, it looks like absolute victory. But Chad, the arrogant hedge fund broker, refuses to accept defeat. The camera drops slightly, angling up at Chad as he forcefully inserts himself into the center of the confrontation. He throws his shoulders back, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. He lets out a harsh, dismissive bark of laughter. "You really think you have won something here?" Nia Chad demands, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you are starring in a courtroom drama? That audio file is a joke." Chad takes a step closer, pointing aggressively at my phone. "It is completely inadmissible in civil court. You recorded her without consent, which makes it legally worthless. My firm retains the best defense attorneys in the state of Georgia. They will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. They will claim the audio is manipulated, deep-faked, or taken entirely out of context. You have absolutely nothing." He crosses his arms over his Patagonia vest, a nasty, victorious grin spreading across his face. "You can play your little recordings all night long, but the facts remain the same. The transaction cleared. The wire transfer was officially routed through the Federal Reserve. $2.5 million is sitting safely and legally in an offshore account that Marcus and I control. The sale is finalized. We have the cash. We have the legal representation. We have the power." He leans in close, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are a public relations girl with a bunch of suitcases on a porch. We have millions. What exactly do you have?" The camera pushes in tight on my face, stopping its continuous orbit to focus entirely on my reaction. I do not look angry. I do not look defeated. I look at Chad with a deep, genuine sense of overwhelming pity. I tilt my head slightly, letting a soft, sympathetic smile touch my lips. "Are you absolutely sure the money is in Marcus' U.S. account, Chad?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a judge delivering a final sentence. "Why do you not open your phone and check?" The heavy silence of the humid suburban night hung over the porch like a physical weight. Chad let out a short, forced laugh that sounded more like a bark, trying to maintain his posture of absolute superiority. He looked at me as if I had just suggested the sky was falling. He shook his head, his blonde hair catching the harsh glare of the security lights. He did not reach for his phone. He believed his own lies too deeply to ever doubt them. But Marcus was not Chad. Marcus lacked the sociopathic confidence required to ignore a direct threat. The color had already drained from Marcus's face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His hands began to tremble so violently that he dropped the thick folder of forged real estate documents onto the decorative gravel. Ignoring the scattered papers, he frantically shoved his hand into the pocket of his tailored slacks and pulled out his phone. He tried to unlock the screen using facial recognition, but his face was slick with a sudden cold sweat. The device rejected him. He swore under his breath, a desperate guttural sound, and jabbed his thumb against the screen, manually typing in his passcode with shaking fingers. Chad turned his head, his mocking smile finally slipping as he watched his brother-in-law unravel. "What are you doing, Marcus?" Chad snapped, his tone sharp and irritated. "Put the phone away. She is bluffing. She is a PR rep trying to spin a narrative. Do not let her get in your head." Marcus did not listen. His eyes were glued to the glowing screen as he navigated to his encrypted offshore banking application. The app loaded a small spinning circle indicating it was connecting to the secure servers. For 3 excruciating seconds, the only sound on the porch was the ragged, shallow breathing of my husband. Then the screen flashed. It was not the comforting green or neutral blue of a successful transaction. The entire display illuminated his panicked face with a harsh, brilliant red warning banner. Marcus let out a sound that was half gasp and half choke. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of my scattered luggage. He stared at the screen as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. "What is it?" Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Her earlier bravado was completely gone, replaced by the frantic desperation of a woman watching her financial safety net evaporate. "Marcus, tell me what it says. Tell me the money is there." Marcus could not speak. His jaw moved, but no sound came out. He simply turned the phone around so the bright red screen faced his mother, his brother-in-law, and his sister. The words were printed in bold, undeniable block letters. Account frozen, pending federal investigation, zero balance. Chad snatched the phone out of Marcus's trembling hand. He stared at the error message, his eyes darting frantically across the screen, reading the fine print of the banking alert. The arrogant hedge fund manager who had just threatened to have me arrested for trespassing suddenly looked like a trapped animal. He tapped the screen aggressively, trying to force the application to refresh, trying to bypass the federal hold. The red banner remained completely immovable. "What did you do?" Chad roared, spinning around to face me. He took a threatening step forward, raising the phone as if he wanted to throw it at my head. "Where is the wire transfer, Naya?" My firm routed that money through an encrypted Cayman portal. It was untraceable. Where is my $2.5 million? I did not step back. I held my ground, standing perfectly still amidst my packed suitcases. The camera slowly pushes in, isolating my calm expression against the backdrop of their absolute chaos. "You really think I just write apology tweets and draft press releases, do you not, Chad?" I said, my voice smooth and dangerously quiet. "You think crisis management is just smiling at reporters and handing out non-disclosure agreements? When a Fortune 500 CEO gets caught embezzling millions of dollars, or a tech billionaire has his private servers compromised, who do you think the board of directors calls to clean up the digital footprint? They call my firm. And they call me." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing the towering hedge fund manager to plant his feet defensively. To scrub a financial crime from the public record, you have to know exactly how financial crimes are committed, I explained, watching the realization slowly dawn in Chad's panicked eyes. You have to understand encryption, routing numbers, digital escrow transfers, and offshore banking loopholes. I deal with high-level cybersecurity breaches before breakfast. And Marcus, you are incredibly sloppy with your cybersecurity. Marcus flinched, wrapping his arms around his own torso, as if trying to physically shield himself from my words. "You used the same lazy 8-character password for your secure crypto wallet that you use for our home Wi-Fi network and your primary checking account." I continued, my gaze shifting to my husband. "When you started spending hours locked in your home office whispering on the phone with Chad, I did not just listen at the door. I logged into our router. I mirrored your laptop. I watched every single keystroke, every panicked email, and every desperate attempt to forge Big Mama Josephine's trust documents." Beatrice let out a high-pitched wail, pressing her hands over her face. Chloe stood frozen beside her husband, her designer sunglasses slipping down the bridge of her nose, her mouth opening and closing silently. "You hacked his computer!" Chad accused, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "That is illegal. That is a federal offense." "I intercepted a fraudulent wire transfer involving my own stolen property," I corrected him sharply. "I call it proactive asset protection." When Marcus finalized the sale of my house to the Delaware LLC I set up, he was incredibly eager to initiate the escrow payout. He filled out the wire transfer instructions on a digital PDF, routing the $2.5 million straight to your offshore account, Chad. But before he hit send, I simply intercepted the document on our local network. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. I opened it and held it up to the porch light. It was a printed copy of the final executed wire transfer receipt from the title company. I altered the destination account numbers on the PDF before it ever reached the escrow officer. I explained, watching Chad's eyes lock onto the document. The title company did exactly what they were supposed to do. They verified the sale cleared the funds and wired $2.5 million in cash. They just did not wire it to the Cayman Islands. Chad lunged forward, grabbing the paper from my hand. He scanned the destination routing numbers, his lips moving silently as he read the recipient information. His face went from pale to completely translucent. The paper shook violently in his grip. Chloe grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his Patagonia vest. "Chad," she pleaded, her voice tight with panic. "Chad, what does it say? Where did she send the money? Tell me we are not broke. Tell me you can get it back." Chad could not answer her. He was staring at the receipt, hyperventilating. I turned my attention directly to him, a smile of absolute pity forming on my face. You see, Chad, when my crisis management firm was auditing a rival hedge fund last year, I saw how easy it was for brokers to hide massive catastrophic losses using crypto derivatives. So when Marcus started acting erratic, I did a quiet background check on your firm. It turns out you are not a financial genius at all. You are a fraud. Your fund has been bleeding cash for 3 straight years, and you have been hiding those losses through an illegal network of offshore tax shelters. Chad dropped the paper. It fluttered to the porch landing softly next to Marcus's expensive leather shoes. I made sure that escrow wire transfer went exactly where it belonged, I said, raising my voice so it echoed clearly in the quiet night air. That $2.5 million was paid directly to the massive federal tax evasion debt that your hedge fund has been hiding from the government for the past 3 years. Thank you, Marcus, for paying off your brother-in-law's federal tax debt. The silence following my final words did not just settle over the porch. It slammed down like a physical weight, crushing the air out of their lungs. Chad stared at the printed receipt, resting on the decorative gravel, as if it were a live hand grenade. The gears in his head were visibly grinding as the catastrophic reality of my actions fully took hold. A sudden anonymous payment of $2.5 million to a delinquent federal tax account was not a quiet resolution. It was a massive, glaring red flag. It was a blaring siren alerting the government to a massive hoard of undocumented cash. Chad let out a guttural sound that was completely devoid of his usual polished arrogance. It was the raw, panicked noise of a cornered predator realizing the trap had just snapped shut. He lunged forward, closing the distance between him and Marcus in a single violent stride. He grabbed Marcus by the collar of his custom-tailored shirt, twisting the expensive fabric so tightly that the top 2 buttons popped off and pinged sharply against the brick facade of the house. "What the hell did you do?" Chad roared, his face mere inches from Marcus. His terrified eyes. The veins in Chad's neck bulged against his skin, his perfect Wall Street composure entirely evaporated. "You stupid, incompetent liability. Do you have any idea what you just triggered? If the IRS sniffs this money, if they trace this sudden massive deposit back to my firm, I will be investigated by the FBI. They will freeze every single asset I manage. They will audit every ledger. You just handed the federal government the exact map they need to dismantle my entire fund." Marcus choked, gagging as Chad twisted the collar tighter, cutting off his air supply. He clawed weakly at Chad's thick wrists, his polished loafers slipping frantically against the decorative gravel. "I did not know." Chad Marcus gasped, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. "I swear I did not know she was watching the network. She tricked me. Naya set me up." "You set yourself up, you arrogant fool," Chad screamed, shaking him so violently that Marcus's head snapped back and forth. "I told you to make sure the transaction was clean. I trusted you to handle your own wife. Now my firm is exposed. I am exposed. I am going to lose my licenses, my clients, my freedom, because you could not secure a simple digital transfer." Beatrice stood frozen for a fraction of a second, watching the 2 pillars of her financial security physically tear each other apart on her front lawn. The illusion of her perfect aristocratic family was shattering into a million irrecoverable pieces. Panic finally overpowered her shock. She dropped her designer handbag and threw herself into the melee. "Chad, stop it!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. She grabbed Chad's forearms, digging her manicured fingernails into his flesh, trying to pry his massive hands away from her golden child. "You are hurting him. Chad, let him go right now. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. We have lawyers. We can call the bank." "There is no bank to call." Beatrice Chad spat, shoving her hands away, but finally releasing his death grip on Marcus' shirt. Marcus collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for air and clutching his bruised throat. Chad loomed over him, breathing heavily, his eyes wild with unadulterated terror. "You cannot call customer service and ask for a refund from the Internal Revenue Service. The money is gone, and the feds are going to come looking for the rest of it." Beatrice looked down at her son, coughing on the ground, and then looked up at her son-in-law, who was currently pacing the driveway like a madman, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. She realized in that instant that Chad was no longer their golden ticket. He was a sinking ship, and he was about to drag their entire family down to the bottom of the ocean with him. Beatrice needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to absorb the blame, someone to sacrifice, so she could maintain her own delusion of innocence. She spun around, her eyes locking onto her daughter. Chloe was backed up against the side of the black Porsche Panamera, trembling visibly, her arms wrapped tightly around her limited edition Birkin bag, as if it could somehow protect her from the implosion of her life. Beatrice marched toward her daughter, her expression twisting into a mask of vicious accusation. "This is your fault!" Beatrice screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at Chloe's face. Chloe flinched, pressing her back harder against the cold metal of the car. "Mom, what are you talking about? I did not do anything." "Do not lie to me!" Beatrice shrieked, closing the distance until she was standing toe-to-toe with her own daughter. "You are the one who brought this upon us. You were the one complaining that Chad's firm needed an immediate cash injection to cover the quarter. You urged your brother to sell the house to get money to invest in your husband. You pushed Marcus into this desperate corner." "I did not." Chloe cried out, her voice entirely stripped of its usual privileged boredom. "Mom, I swear I did not know Chad was in trouble with the IRS. I just wanted my country club fees paid. You are the one who told Marcus to forge the documents. You paid the notary. You set this whole thing up. I was protecting this family use legacy," Beatrice roared, completely ignoring her own blatant hypocrisy. "I was trying to secure our future. But you manipulated your brother because you are too weak to manage your own husband-us financial failures. You sacrificed Marcus-us marriage just to keep up your pathetic facade of extreme wealth. You ruined us, Chloe." The camera slowly pans back to me standing quietly by my luggage. I did not intervene. I did not gloat or shout or throw insults. I did not have to. I simply stood back in the shadows, allowing the cold, hard light of reality to finally expose the deep, rotting core of the family I had spent 5 years trying to please. I watched them cannibalize each other with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. When you strip away the designer clothes, the imported cars, and the massive trust funds, they were nothing but desperate, selfish cowards entirely willing to devour their own flesh and blood to save themselves. Chloe's perfectly applied makeup was completely ruined, black streaks of expensive mascara running down her flushed cheeks. She looked back and forth between her furious mother, her terrified husband, and her brother, who was still kneeling on the gravel trying to catch his breath. The realization hit Chloe that she was being positioned to take the fall for the entire criminal conspiracy. Beatrice was going to throw her to the wolves to save Marcus and protect her own skin. Something inside the spoiled, protected sister finally snapped. "I did not urge him." Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing violently down the quiet suburban street. She threw her designer bag onto the hood of the Porsche and marched straight past her mother, pointing directly at Marcus' pale, sweating face. "Do not try to put this on me, Mom. I did not make him sell anything. He needed the money to run away with his mistress." The absolute silence that followed Chloe's explosive confession was heavier than the humid Georgia air. The crickets in the manicured hedges seemed to stop chirping. The distant hum of highway traffic vanished. Every single pair of eyes on that porch snapped away from Chloe and locked directly onto Marcus. Marcus stood frozen, his expensive silk tie suddenly looking like a noose around his neck. The blood that had just begun to return to his face vanished once again, leaving him chalky and pale. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked exactly like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming 18-wheeler. Then survival instinct kicked in. He frantically shook his head, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of innocence. "She is lying," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking halfway through the sentence. He pointed a shaking finger at his sister. "You are out of your mind, Chloe. You are just trying to take the heat off yourself because your husband is a federal criminal. Mom, tell her she is crazy." "Nia, honey, you know I would never do something like that. I love you. We are building a life together." It was pathetic. It was the desperate flailing of a man who had relied on his family's wealth and his own mediocre charm to completely avoid accountability for his entire adult life. He actually thought he could manipulate his way out of this with a few hollow words of affection. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I slowly reached down into the large leather tote bag sitting on top of my largest suitcase. My hand brushed past my laptop and my makeup bag, finding the thick, heavy manila envelope I had placed there early this morning. I pulled it out, the rigid cardboard feeling solid and satisfying in my grip. "You should really stop talking, Marcus," I said, my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. "Every time you open your mouth, you just dig the hole a little deeper." I did not hand the envelope to my husband. I did not hand it to Beatrice. I turned my body slightly and whipped the envelope directly at Chad's chest. The heavy package hit his Patagonia vest with a solid thud and split open. Dozens of high-resolution glossy 8x10 photographs spilled out, cascading through the air and landing face up on the decorative gravel between us. The harsh glow of the motion sensor security lights illuminated every single undeniable detail. There were photos of Marcus sitting in a dimly lit corner booth of a high-end downtown steakhouse holding hands with a woman. There were photos of Marcus and the same woman walking into the lobby of a discreet luxury boutique hotel on the north side of the city. There were photos of them kissing next to his car in a parking garage. But the most important detail was not what Marcus was doing. It was who he was doing it with. Chad stared down at the photographs scattered around his expensive shoes. His eyes darted from one image to the next, his brain struggling to process the visual information. The woman in the photos had striking platinum blonde hair worn in a very specific sharp bob. She was wearing designer pencil skirts and carrying a distinctive red leather briefcase. "That is not just some random girl from a bar, Chad," I said, stepping forward, so I was standing right over the scattered evidence. "Take a really good look at her face. That is Jessica, your senior executive assistant, the woman who manages your daily schedule, the woman who handles your encrypted communications." Chad's breathing stopped completely. His chest stopped moving. He stared at the picture of Marcus and Jessica kissing, and the reality of the situation crashed into him like a physical blow. "You see, Chad?" I continued, my voice carrying the steady, rhythmic cadence of a seasoned prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Marcus is not smart enough to execute a complex offshore wire fraud by himself. He barely understands how to manage his own checking account. He needed an inside man, or rather an inside woman. Jessica holds the keys to your entire kingdom, does she not? She has the administrative passwords to your hidden ledgers. She knows exactly how you route your untaxed capital through those Cayman Island shell companies." Beatrice let out a low, horrified moan, pressing her hands against her cheeks. She looked at her son as if she did not recognize him anymore. "They were not just having a cheap suburban affair, Chad," I said, pointing down at the photos. "They were studying your operation. They were plotting. Marcus was not going to give you that $2.5 million from the house sale. He was going to use it to fund a new life. He and Jessica were quietly transferring your hidden offshore assets into a completely separate, untraceable crypto wallet. They were going to drain your illegal funds, blind you completely, and disappear to a non-extradition country before you even realized the money was missing. They were going to leave you holding the bag for the SEC and the IRS. The absolute magnitude of the betrayal short-circuited Chad's brain. He realized in one terrifying instant that the brother-in-law he had constantly mocked and belittled had been actively conspiring with his own trusted assistant to steal his hidden wealth and destroy his life. Marcus was not just a loser, he was a parasite actively chewing through Chad's financial lifelines. Chad let out a roar that did not sound human. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated masculine rage. He lunged forward with terrifying speed. Marcus did not even have time to raise his hands in defense. Chad grabbed the front of Marcus' expensive dress shirt, twisting the fabric in his massive fists, and slammed him backward against the brick column of the porch. The impact rattled the windows of the estate. "You absolute parasite!" Chad screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You thought you could steal from me. You thought you could take my money and my assistant and leave me to take the fall for the feds. I gave you everything. I kept you afloat when you were drowning in debt, and you try to ruin me." Chad pulled his right arm back, the muscles in his shoulder bunching tight beneath his shirt, and drove his fist directly into Marcus's face. The sound of bone cracking echoed sharply across the lawn. Marcus crumpled instantly, his legs giving out beneath him. He hit the gravel hard, rolling onto his side and clutching his jaw. Bright red blood immediately began to spill from his split lip, and his nose dripping onto the crisp white collar of his shirt. Chad stood over him, chest heaving, his hands balled into tight, trembling fists, ready to strike again. Beatrice screamed a high-pitched, piercing sound of maternal terror. She threw herself forward, grabbing Chad's arm and pulling with all her remaining strength. "Stop it, Chad!" Beatrice shrieked, tears finally ruining her perfect composure. "You will kill him! Let him go!" Chad shoved her off with a violent jerk of his shoulder, pointing a warning finger at her face. "You keep away from me, Beatrice. Your son is a thief. Your entire family is a liability. I am done with all of you." He turned his back on them, completely ignoring his sobbing wife, and marched toward his black Porsche, leaving Marcus bleeding on the ground. Marcus slowly pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the gravel, breathing heavily. His custom shirt was ruined, his face was rapidly swelling, and his grand escape plan was completely destroyed. He had lost his mistress, his stolen money, and his brother-in-law, U.S. protection, all in the span of 10 minutes. He was backed into the tightest, most inescapable corner of his entire life. But narcissists do not surrender when they are cornered. They simply become more vicious. Marcus wiped the blood from his chin with the back of his hand, smearing the red stain across his cheek. He looked up at me, standing perfectly composed beside my bags. A dark, twisted smile slowly spread across his bruised face. He let out a wet, ragged laugh that sounded completely unhinged. "Go ahead and laugh," Nia, Marcus rasped, pushing himself up so he was sitting on his knees, his eyes burning with a manic, desperate energy. "Let Chad walk away. Let the feds take his money. I do not care. You think you won because you froze the house sale. You think you outsmarted me." He gripped the edge of a brick planter, pulling himself unsteadily to his feet. He swayed slightly, but his gaze never left mine. "You forgot one very important detail about our little marriage, Nia," he sneered, his voice rising in volume, filled with toxic, triumphant venom. "We live in a state with equitable distribution laws. You just inherited $10 million from that old hag Josephine. You put the house in a trust, but you did not hide the liquid cash fast enough. Under marital law, I am entitled to half of every single dime you brought into this marriage." He took a stumbling step toward me, pointing a bloody finger at my face. "You are going to pay me $5 million, Nia. I do not care what it takes. I will hire the most vicious, ruthless divorce attorneys on the Eastern Seaboard. I will drag your name through the mud. I will tie up your entire inheritance in probate court for the next 20 years. You think you ruined my life today. I am going to use your own grandmother-us money to completely destroy yours." Beatrice immediately rushes forward to shield her son. She drops to her knees on the sharp gravel, completely ignoring the ruin of her designer skirt. She pulls a monogrammed silk handkerchief from her pocket and begins dabbing frantically at the blood pouring from Marcus's split lip. She glares up at Chad with absolute venom, but her primary focus remains fiercely locked on me. She hauls Marcus to his feet, wrapping her thin arm around his waist to steady his swaying frame. Her chin tilts upward, her posture screaming of old money entitlement and vicious matriarchal pride. "He is exactly right," Beatrice declares, her voice ringing out across the manicured lawns, sharp and triumphant. Her eyes gleam with a sudden, intoxicating dose of greed. "You actually thought you could outmaneuver us, Nia. I knew from the day you married my son that you were hiding something. I knew you were trying to secure your own assets while leeching off our social standing. That is why I went into Marcus's home office safe 3 years ago. I took a copy of your prenuptial agreement and I handed it directly to the most ruthless estate litigators in Atlanta." She pats Marcus's chest, smoothing down his ruined, bloody shirt as if presenting him as the ultimate victor. "They tore your little contract apart." Beatrice boasts a sickeningly sweet smile stretching across her face. "They found the loopholes you thought you so cleverly disguised. The document lacks proper independent counsel verification on the final addendums and fails to accurately disclose the full projected value of Josephine Must Trust. In the eyes of a Georgia family court, that agreement is entirely void. It is legally worthless. Marcus spits another mouthful of blood onto the ground, but he manages to mirror his mother's arrogant smirk. He leans heavily against Beatrice, his confidence returning in a rush of toxic adrenaline. "You are going to finance my new life?" "Naya." Marcus slurs his words, slightly muffled by his swelling jaw. "I will take half of the Aspen estate. I will take half of the 10 million. I will have your accounts frozen by tomorrow morning. You thought you left me with nothing, but you just handed me the keys to your entire generational wealth. I am going to bleed you dry, and there is not a single thing your crisis management skills can do to stop it." I do not move. I do not flinch. I stand perfectly still in the humid night air, letting the absolute silence stretch out between us. I let their delusions of grandeur hang suspended in the darkness. Then I begin to laugh. It starts as a low, soft chuckle echoing from the back of my throat. It is not hysterical or defensive. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated amusement. The laugh grows louder, echoing against the brick pillars of the sprawling suburban house, cutting through the tension like a newly sharpened blade. The camera slowly pushes in, leaving the chaotic background of the porch and focusing entirely on my face. My expression is sharp, cold, and utterly merciless. The triumphant smiles on Beatrice and Marcus's faces instantly falter. The deep-seated paranoia that defines their existence flares to life. They recognize the sound of someone who holds an unbeatable hand. "You really are a remarkable piece of work, Beatrice," I say, my voice steady and smooth. "You spent thousands of dollars paying elite lawyers to review a stolen document. But you made one catastrophic error. The document you stole from Marcus's safe was a draft. It was a preliminary mock-up printed 3 weeks before our wedding." Beatrice freezes her hand hovering over Marcus's shoulder. The color drains from her cheeks, leaving her looking haggard and old. I reach into my leather tote bag and pull out a thick, heavy envelope sealed with red wax and stamped with the insignia of my grandfather, U.S. legendary law firm. I break the seal with my thumb and pull out a bound stack of crisp, watermarked legal paper. The official prenuptial agreement, the one actually filed and recorded with the county clerk, is entirely different, I explain, taking a slow, deliberate step toward them. Marcus would know that if he had bothered to read it. But Marcus was severely hungover the morning of the signing. He was desperate to get to a golf game with Chad. He sat in my lawyer U.S. office tapping his foot and simply signed his name exactly where the neon sticky notes told him to sign. He never read a single paragraph of the final draft. Marcus's eyes widen in terror. He tries to take a step forward, but his legs tremble violently. "What did you make me sign, Nia?" he demands, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "I made you sign a document that contained a highly specific, incredibly unforgiving lifestyle and morality clause," I say, tapping the thick legal packet against my open palm. A standard infidelity clause was not quite enough protection for my grandmother U.S. assets. The clause explicitly states that any proven instance of marital misconduct, financial deception, or infidelity completely and permanently negates any claim to spousal support division of premarital assets, and specifically shields any and all future inheritance. I gesture casually down to the glossy photographs still scattered across the gravel. The photos of Marcus holding hands with Chad, U.S. blonde executive assistant. The photos of them slipping into the discreet downtown hotel. With this undeniable, time-stamped photographic proof of your prolonged affair, that equitable distribution law you are banking on evaporates completely, I declare, my voice ringing with finality. You do not get the Aspen house. You do not get a single dime of the $10 million. You get absolutely nothing. And because of the penalty stipulations written into that very same clause, you are now legally responsible for 100% of my attorney fees should you foolishly decide to contest the divorce in court. You are financially neutered, Marcus. I toss the heavy-bound legal document. It hits the gravel with a heavy thud, landing directly on top of the photograph of Marcus and Jessica kissing. With this proof of infidelity, Marcus not only gets zero, But he has to pay all my legal fees, I say, looking down at the ruined man who thought he could destroy me. But wait, the best part is yet to come. Beatrice immediately rushes forward to shield her son. She drops to her knees on the sharp gravel, completely ignoring the ruin of her designer skirt. She pulls a monogrammed silk handkerchief from her pocket and begins dabbing frantically at the blood pouring from Marcus's split lip. She glares up at Chad with absolute venom, but her primary focus remains fiercely locked on me. She hauls Marcus to his feet, wrapping her thin arm around his waist to steady his swaying frame. Her chin tilts upward, her posture screaming of old money entitlement and vicious matriarchal pride. "He is exactly right," Beatrice declares, her voice ringing out across the manicured lawns, sharp and triumphant. Her eyes gleam with a sudden intoxicating dose of greed. "You actually thought you could outmaneuver us, Nia. I knew from the day you married my son that you were hiding something. I knew you were trying to secure your own assets while leeching off our social standing. That is why I went into Marcus Yu's home office safe 3 years ago. I took a copy of your prenuptial agreement and I handed it directly to the most ruthless estate litigators in Atlanta." She pats Marcus's chest, smoothing down his ruined, bloody shirt as if presenting him as the ultimate victor. "They tore your little contract apart." Beatrice boasts a sickeningly sweet smile stretching across her face. "They found the loopholes you thought you so cleverly disguised. The document lacks proper independent counsel verification on the final addendums and fails to accurately disclose the full projected value of Josephine U.S. Trust. In the eyes of a Georgia family court, that agreement is entirely void. It is legally worthless." Marcus spits another mouthful of blood onto the ground, but he manages to mirror his mother's arrogant smirk. He leans heavily against Beatrice, his confidence returning in a rush of toxic adrenaline. "You are going to finance my new life, Nia." Marcus slurs his words, slightly muffled by his swelling jaw. "I will take half of the Aspen estate. I will take half of the 10 million. I will have your accounts frozen by tomorrow morning. You thought you left me with nothing, but you just handed me the keys to your entire generational wealth? I am going to bleed you dry, and there is not a single thing your crisis management skills can do to stop it." I do not move. I do not flinch. I stand perfectly still in the humid night air, letting the absolute silence stretch out between us. I let their delusions of grandeur hang suspended in the darkness. Then I begin to laugh. It starts as a low, soft chuckle echoing from the back of my throat. It is not hysterical or defensive. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated amusement. The laugh grows louder, echoing against the brick pillars of the sprawling suburban house, cutting through the tension like a newly sharpened blade. The camera slowly pushes in, leaving the chaotic background of the porch and focusing entirely on my face. My expression is sharp, cold, and utterly merciless. The triumphant smiles on Beatrice and Marcus's faces instantly falter. The deep-seated paranoia that defines their existence flares to life. They recognize the sound of someone who holds an unbeatable hand. "You really are a remarkable piece of work, Beatrice," I say, my voice steady and smooth. "You spent thousands of dollars paying elite lawyers to review a stolen document, but you made one catastrophic error. The document you stole from Marcus U.S. safe was a draft. It was a preliminary mock-up printed 3 weeks before our wedding." Beatrice freezes her hand, hovering over Marcus's shoulder. The color drains from her cheeks, leaving her looking haggard and old. I reach into my leather tote bag and pull out a thick, heavy envelope sealed with red wax and stamped with the insignia of my grandfather, U.S. legendary law firm. I break the seal with my thumb and pull out a bound stack of crisp, watermarked legal paper. "The official prenuptial agreement, the one actually filed and recorded with the county clerk, is entirely different," I explain, taking a slow, deliberate step toward them. Marcus would know that if he had bothered to read it. But Marcus was severely hungover the morning of the signing. He was desperate to get to a golf game with Chad. He sat in my lawyer U.S. office tapping his foot and simply signed his name exactly where the neon sticky notes told him to sign. He never read a single paragraph of the final draft. Marcus's eyes widen in terror. He tries to take a step forward, but his legs tremble violently. "What did you make me sign, Nia?" he demands, his voice cracking with sudden panic. I made you sign a document that contained a highly specific, incredibly unforgiving lifestyle and morality clause, I say, tapping the thick legal packet against my open palm. A standard infidelity clause was not quite enough protection for my grandmother us assets. The clause explicitly states that any proven instance of marital misconduct, financial deception, or infidelity completely and permanently negates any claim to spousal support division of premarital assets and specifically shields any and all future inheritance. I gesture casually down to the glossy photographs still scattered across the gravel. The photos of Marcus holding hands with Chad's blonde executive assistant. The photos of them slipping into the discreet downtown hotel. With this undeniable time-stamped photographic proof of your prolonged affair, that equitable distribution law you are banking on evaporates completely, I declare, my voice ringing with finality. You do not get the Aspen house. You do not get a single dime of the $10 million. You get absolutely nothing. And because of the penalty stipulations written into that very same clause, you are now legally responsible for 100% of my attorney fees, should you foolishly decide to contest the divorce in court. You are financially neutered, Marcus. I toss the heavy-bound legal document. It hits the gravel with a heavy thud, landing directly on top of the photograph of Marcus and Jessica kissing. I watch Marcus scramble to process the absolute destruction of his grand legal strategy. He stares at the thick, bound prenup lying on the gravel, his bruised face twitching with denial. Beside him, Beatrice is shaking her head, refusing to accept that her expensive lawyers were outmaneuvered by a simple decoy document. She opens her mouth to argue, to claim that marital assets are still marital assets, regardless of what a piece of paper says. I do not give her the chance to speak. I reach into my leather tote bag one final time. My fingers wrap around a thick envelope sealed with the official crest of the state probate court. I pull it out and hold it up, allowing the harsh security lights to illuminate the heavy cream-colored parchment. This is the official, certified copy of Big Mama Josephine, U.S. last will and testament. I announce, my voice carrying the steady, undeniable weight of absolute victory. You see, Beatrice, my grandmother, was not a fool. She did not build a generational empire by trusting people with weak handshakes and fake smiles. She built her fortune by seeing people exactly for who they were. And she saw right through your cheap country club facade the very first time she met you at our rehearsal dinner. Beatrice stiffens her eyes, locking onto the document. The aristocratic superiority she has clung to all night begins to dissolve, replaced by a creeping cold dread. Josephine knew your family was rotting from the inside out. I continue, taking a slow, deliberate step toward my mother-in-law. She knew you were drowning in debt, keeping up appearances. She knew Marcus was weak, entitled, and entirely dependent on your toxic approval. And she knew that the second I received my inheritance, you would try to sink your greedy claws into it. So she built a fortress around my assets. She installed a financial poison pill so toxic that it would choke anyone who tried to swallow it. I unfold the heavy parchment, the crisp sound cutting through the humid night air. Let me read you the exact legal phrasing, Beatrice. I want you to understand exactly how thoroughly you have been outplayed. I clear my throat, projecting my voice so every single word rings out across the manicured lawn. In the event of attempted financial coercion, theft, fraud, or hostile marital dissolution initiated by Marcus or any member of his immediate family, a triggering event automatically occurs. Marcus lets out a ragged breath, wiping another smear of blood from his chin. What does that mean? He demands, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. What triggering event? I lower the document and look directly into his terrified eyes. It means that the second you initiated a fraudulent wire transfer, the second you tried to steal from me every single asset left to my name, automatically changed status. The entire $10 million in liquid cash. The massive, sprawling ski estate in Aspen. All of it. It was instantly and irrevocably transferred out of my personal name. Beatrice lets out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Transferred where? She croaks, her face entirely devoid of color. Transferred directly into the Josephine Heritage Charitable Foundation. I declare, a wide, radiant smile breaking across my face. A fully incorporated nonprofit organization dedicated to funding higher education for underprivileged women. The money is locked in an ironclad trust. The Aspen estate is now corporate property used exclusively for charity retreats. I do not own it, Marcus. I am simply the named managing director of the foundation. I draw a massive, untamperable executive salary for the rest of my natural life. But the assets themselves cease to be my personal property the second you attempt to claim them. The silence that descends on the porch is absolute and profound. It is the sound of total financial annihilation. In other words, Marcus, I say, leaning forward slightly, letting the reality of his complete destruction wash over him. You cannot divorce me and demand half of a non-profit organization. You cannot take an equitable distribution of a charity. The family court has zero jurisdiction over a corporate entity. The inheritance is entirely out of your reach. The loopholes are closed. The money is gone. Marcus drops to his knees on the sharp gravel. He does not even try to catch himself. His hands fall limply to his sides. The smug, defiant smirk he wore just moments ago has been completely wiped away, leaving behind the face of a broken, empty man. He stares at the ground, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, unable to comprehend the magnitude of his failure. He traded his marriage, his career, and his freedom for a massive payday that never actually existed. Beatrice sways on her expensive heels, looking as if the ground beneath her has suddenly turned to liquid. Her knees buckle and she collapses against the brick pillar of her precious suburban mansion. The pristine image she fought so hard to protect is completely shattered. She has no money. Her son is facing severe federal fraud charges. Her son-in-law is about to be investigated by the IRS. Her daughter is screaming hysterically by the porch. The generational wealth she thought she had secured has vanished into thin air, leaving her with nothing but debts and disgrace. You get absolutely nothing, I say, looking down at the four of them, my voice echoing with cold finality. You conspired against me. You tried to ruin my life and steal my future, and in the end you are left completely empty-handed. You are totally and utterly broke. Chloe sinks to the ground beside the front tire of the car, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. Chad remains frozen near the driveway, staring blankly into the darkness, his mind entirely consumed by the impending arrival of federal auditors. Marcus is a bleeding, shivering mess on the gravel. Beatrice just stares at me, her eyes wide and vacant, finally realizing that she picked a fight with someone who was always 10 steps ahead. I turn my back on them and reach for the handle of my largest suitcase, preparing to walk down the driveway and leave them to wallow in the wreckage of their own making. But before I can take a single step, a new sound cuts through the heavy, suffocating silence of the night. It starts as a faint, distant wail echoing from the main highway. It grows louder rapidly, piercing the quiet suburban atmosphere. The sound is sharp, urgent, and entirely unmistakable. The wailing multiplies, layering over itself as multiple vehicles accelerate toward our exact location. Chad snaps out of his paralyzed daze, his head whipping toward the entrance of the affluent neighborhood. Marcus freezes on the gravel, his bloodshot eyes going wide with fresh terror. Beatrice presses her back against the brick pillar, her entire body shaking. The wailing grows deafening, bouncing off the manicured houses and echoing down the long, winding street. The sound tears through the neighborhood, ripping apart the quiet, wealthy facade. Suddenly, the dark shadows of the massive oak trees at the end of the block are illuminated by rapid flashing bursts of stark red and brilliant blue light. The sirens are not passing by. They are turning directly onto the street. The heavy tires of multiple police cruisers screech against the asphalt, accelerating with aggressive, terrifying purpose. The flashing lights paint the faces of my ruined family in alternating shades of crimson and harsh blue. They are heading straight for the house. The flashing lights cut violently through the darkness, painting the pristine white columns of the estate in frantic flashes of crimson and blinding blue. The deafening wail of the sirens abruptly cuts out, replacing the noise with the heavy, aggressive crunch of thick tires tearing up the decorative gravel driveway. Beatrice watches the approaching vehicles and something inside her finally snaps. The absolute certainty of her old money invincibility shatters into a million irreparable pieces. Her legs give out entirely. She slides down the rough brick pillar, her fingernails scraping desperately against the mortar. She hits the sharp gravel hard, tearing the fabric of her custom-tailored skirt. Her perfectly sprayed hair falls across her face in a tangled mess. The aristocratic Southern matriarch is completely gone. In her place sits a terrified, hyperventilating old woman watching the complete annihilation of her entire bloodline. By the Portia, Chloe's grief instantly morphs into sheer animalistic panic. She realizes the sirens are not a coincidence. She realizes the consequences of her husband's illegal offshore accounts have finally arrived at her front door. She scrambles up from the ground, throwing herself at Chad. She claws at the front of his expensive vest, her voice rising into a hysterical shriek. "Chad, do something!" Chloe screams, spittle flying from her lips as she shakes him. "Call your people! Call the judge! You have to fix this! They cannot take us!" Chad ignores her completely. The mask of the arrogant, untouchable tech bro has melted away, revealing the cornered rat underneath. He violently shoves Chloe backward, sending her stumbling into the side of the car. He is not trying to save his wife. He is entirely consumed by self-preservation. He is frantically stabbing at his phone screen, his hands shaking so violently he keeps dropping the device. He holds it up to his ear, pacing wildly, looking frantically toward the dark tree line at the edge of the property, calculating if he has enough time to sprint into the woods and disappear. "Pick up the phone," Chad hisses into the receiver, his eyes darting back and forth. "Pick up the damn phone. I need the jet prepped. I need you to wire the emergency funds right now, but it is far too late to run." These are not local neighborhood patrol cruisers responding to a domestic disturbance. 3 massive matte black SUVs barrel up the long driveway. They do not park politely. They swerve aggressively, cutting off all possible exit routes and completely boxing in Chad's Porsche. The heavy armored doors fly open in perfect unison. The men and women stepping out of the vehicles are not wearing standard police uniforms. They are wearing dark tactical gear and dark windbreakers with bold yellow letters plastered across their backs. FBI. They move with terrifying practiced efficiency. 2 agents immediately flank the driveway, cutting off Chad's path to the woods. Chad freezes his phone, slipping from his sweaty grip and clattering onto the pavement. He slowly raises his hands, his chest heaving, his face drained of all blood. A tall, broad-shouldered lead agent marches directly up the center of the driveway. He bypasses Chloe, who is sobbing hysterically against the car tire. He ignores Marcus, who is still curled on the ground, clutching his bleeding face. He stops right in the middle of the carnage, radiating absolute authority. Chad attempts one final pathetic display of power. He drops his hands slightly, trying to summon his usual arrogant bluster. "Listen to me," Chad stammers, his voice trembling. "You are making a massive mistake. I play golf with the district attorney. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I demand you call my legal team before you take another step on my property." The lead agent does not even blink. He completely ignores Chad's hollow threats. He reaches into the inside pocket of his tactical jacket and pulls out a thick folded stack of official documents. He snaps the papers open, the sound sharp and definitive in the tense night air. Marcus and Chad, the lead agent, announces, his voice booming over Chloe's relentless sobbing. "You are both under arrest for suspicion of complex federal wire fraud and systemic tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." 2 agents immediately step forward, hauling a limp, bleeding Marcus off the gravel and snapping heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. 2 more agents aggressively spin Chad around, slamming him against the hood of his own Porsche and securing his arms behind his back. The lead agent lowers the first warrant and pulls out a second sheet of paper. He slowly turns his gaze away from the 2 men and looks directly down at Beatrice, who is still trembling on the ground by the brick pillar. And Beatrice, the agent, says, his tone devoid of any sympathy, "We are going to need you to step into the vehicle right now. You are being brought into federal custody for immediate questioning regarding the felony bribery of a state notary public." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicking around Beatrice's thin wrists echoes louder than the dying sirens. Her knees buckle immediately. The 2 federal agents catch her by her arms, hauling her upright with practiced indifference. The monogrammed silk handkerchief she used to wipe her son's blood flutters from her trembling fingers, landing in a dark puddle of motor oil and gravel on the driveway. Porch lights begin to flick on across the exclusive cul-de-sac like a synchronized theatrical display. Heavy oak doors swing open. The wealthy neighbors, the very people Beatrice has spent 3 decades trying to impress, dominate, and socially terrorize, step out onto their immaculate front lawns. Men in silk robes and women in velvet slippers gather at the edges of their property lines. The soft glow of smartphone screens illuminates the darkness as cameras are raised high, capturing every single humiliating second of the matriarch's spectacular downfall. This is the exact nightmare Beatrice has spent her entire life running from. The absolute destruction of her pristine, aristocratic facade. She sees the glowing lenses of the cameras pointing directly at her ruined designer skirt and her handcuffed wrists. The sheer horror of her complete social annihilation finally overrides her vicious pride. She twists wildly against the agent's unyielding grip and locks her eyes onto me. The toxic venom she spewed all evening is entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, desperate terror. "Nia, please." Beatrice begs, her voice breaking into a high-pitched wail. Tears spill over her eyelashes, carving jagged dark lines through her expensive foundation. "Tell them to stop. We are family, Nia. We are family. You have the trust fund. Call your grandfather, us firm. Pay their bail. Pay whatever they want. You have to save us." I do not rush to her side. I slowly walk down the porch steps, my heels crunching rhythmically against the gravel, until I am standing just inches away from her tear-stained face. I look at her shaking frame and feel absolutely nothing but a profound, icy calm. "Family?" I ask, my voice dropping to a low, steady register that cuts perfectly through the chaotic noise of the police radios. 10 minutes ago, you called me a liability. You told me my entire bloodline was a joke. You specifically ordered me to pack my bags and go back to whatever slum you thought I crawled out of. I tilt my head, offering her a bright, blindingly radiant smile. "I am simply following your explicit instructions, Beatrice. I am leaving. As for you, I sincerely hope your federal holding cell matches your aristocratic standards. Good luck finding a country club behind bars." Beatrice lets out a guttural, devastating sob, slumping entirely against the agents as they drag her toward the back of the waiting SUV. Marcus is already in the back of another cruiser, crying loudly into the plexiglass divider, his ruined face pressed against the window. The focus of the chaos violently shifts toward the driveway. Chad is not going down quietly. The arrogant, untouchable tech bro facade has been entirely replaced by the frantic thrashing of a cornered animal. He violently twists his shoulders against the two agents, pinning him to the hood of his own Porsche. The custom seams of his expensive vest rip loudly. "Get your hands off me!" Chad roars, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I am not going anywhere. You have absolutely zero proof of any offshore activity. My servers are heavily encrypted on foreign soil. You have no jurisdiction here. I will sue this entire department into bankruptcy." He thrashes his head around, desperately scanning the dark tree line and the flashing lights, as if expecting his mistress to emerge from the shadows with a magical solution. His sense of entitlement is so deeply ingrained that he genuinely believes he can order his way out of a federal indictment. "Jessica," Chad screams, his voice cracking with pure manic panic. "Jessica, initiate the White Protocol. Call the Cayman proxy. Burn the hidden ledgers. Jessica, where are you?" The lead FBI agent finishes securing the heavy plastic zip ties around Chad's wrists, pulling them painfully tight. He steps back casually, adjusting the collar of his tactical jacket. He looks down at the flailing millionaire executive with an expression of absolute utter boredom. "You can stop yelling for your assistant, Chad." The agent states, his voice projecting clearly over the flashing lights and the sobbing women. "Jessica is not coming to save you." Chad freezes his chest, heaving, his eyes darting frantically to the agent's face. In fact, the agent continues casually pulling a small digital recorder from his pocket. "Your assistant walked directly into our downtown field office at 6 o'clock this morning. She brought a very large box with her. She handed over every single encrypted hard drive, the master passwords to your hidden ledgers, and the exact routing numbers for your offshore shell companies. The blood drains so rapidly from Chada's face that he looks like a corpse. His mouth opens, but his vocal cords completely refuse to work. She gave us everything, Chad, the agent says, delivering the final fatal blow with pinpoint precision. She laid out your entire evasion strategy. She sold out your operation and handed us your brother-in-law on a silver platter. And she did it all in exchange for full federal immunity. You have no money left. You have no hidden servers. Your own mistress just handed you a 20-year prison sentence and walked away completely free. The remaining fight leaves Chada's body in a single violent rush. His knees give out entirely. He slides helplessly down the sleek, expensive hood of the Porsche, his cheeks scraping against the custom paint job until he collapses into a pathetic, crumpled heap on the driveway. The federal agents do not hesitate. They haul Chad off the pavement by his armpits, his expensive designer shoes dragging across the gravel. He does not fight them anymore. The utter certainty of his ruin has rendered him completely catatonic. They load him into the back of the second SUV, slamming the heavy armored door shut with a resounding metallic thud that echoes across the quiet suburban street. The driveway is a scene of absolute devastation. The flashing red and blue lights continue to sweep across the manicured landscaping, illuminating the wreckage of a dynasty that was built entirely on lies, theft, and toxic entitlement. Marcus is already secured in the first vehicle, his face hidden from the glaring cameras of the neighborhood spectators. Beatrice is gone. Chad is gone. And then there is Chloe. She is kneeling on the sharp stones, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The reality of the situation is crashing down on her in waves. Her husband is a federal criminal. Her mother is facing felony bribery charges. Her brother is penniless and indicted. The federal government is going to seize every single bank account, every investment portfolio, every luxury vehicle, and every piece of real estate associated with Chad U.S. name. She is about to be left with absolutely nothing. Her head snaps up, and her tear-streaked eyes lock directly onto me. I am standing perfectly still on the bottom step of the porch, observing the scene with the detached clinical precision of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt ledger. I do not feel a single ounce of pity. I simply watch as the survival instincts of a true narcissist kick into overdrive. Chloe scrambles to her feet, stumbling awkwardly in her high heels. She practically lunges across the distance between us, throwing herself at my feet. Her manicured hands wrap desperately around my ankles, her grip surprisingly strong. "Nia, please," she wails, her voice a grating, high-pitched screech of pure panic. "You have to help me. You have to give me a loan. Just a small loan from your trust. I need to hire a divorce attorney right now, tonight. I have to file the papers before the feds freeze the marital assets. I had no idea what Chad was doing. I swear to you, Nia, I did not know anything about the offshore accounts. If I do not divorce him immediately, they will take my clothes, they will take my jewelry, they will leave me on the street." She looks up at me, her face a smeared mess of expensive mascara and desperation. "We are sisters, Nia," she begs, tightening her grip on my legs. "We are family. You cannot just leave me here to take the fall for him. I will pay you back every single dime. I just need enough for a retainer. You have $10 million. 100,000 is nothing to you. Please." I look down at the woman who spent the last 3 years making my life a living hell. I look at the woman who mocked my clothes, who belittled my career, who sat at my dining table and laughed while her mother and brother plotted to steal my inheritance. I slowly reach down and pry her fingers off my ankles, peeling her hands away with cold, deliberate force. I take a step back, putting a clear, undeniable physical boundary between us. "Do not ever touch me again, Chloe." I say, my voice perfectly level, carrying the frigid edge of absolute zero. "And do not ever use the word sister when speaking to me." She recoils, shrinking back onto her heels, but her eyes remain fixed on me, wide and pleading. "You want money for a divorce attorney?" I ask, tilting my head slightly. "You are terrified the federal government is going to seize your precious designer wardrobe to pay off Chad U.S. victims." "Yes," she gasps, nodding frantically. "They will take everything, Nia. I need a ruthless lawyer. I need protection." I let out a short, sharp breath of amusement. "You already have all the funding you need, Chloe. I gesture casually toward the designer handbag sitting on the hood of her husband's seized Porsche. Why do not you sell that limited edition Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag you are so incredibly proud of? Chloe freezes her eyes, darting toward the bag and back to me. Her breathing hitches. You know the one I am talking about? I continue my tone, slicing through her like a scalpel. The bag you paraded around the country club last month. The bag you claimed Chad bought you for your anniversary. Except Chad did not buy it, did he? You bought it using the joint credit card Marcus and I shared. The card you conveniently gained access to when Marcus carelessly left his wallet at your house. You charged $85,000 to my account, and Marcus spent 3 weeks lying to my face, covering it up, claiming it was a fraudulent charge, while his own sister paraded the stolen goods around town. Chloe's jaw drops open. The blood drains from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly in the flashing police lights. She realizes in that exact moment that I knew everything. I knew every single petty theft, every calculated insult, every hidden deception. I just sat back and waited for the perfect moment to execute the trap. You can take that stolen bag to a pawn shop downtown. I state, my voice devoid of any emotion. You can sell it and use the cash to hire whatever cut-rate public defender is willing to take your case. Because you are not getting a single cent from me. My trust fund is entirely inaccessible to anyone carrying your last name. You are a parasite, Chloe, and your host has finally been exterminated. She stares at me, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, entirely unable to process the absolute rejection. She has spent her entire life manipulating people with her tears and her entitlement, and now she is facing a brick wall of pure consequence. And there is one more thing, I add, stepping past her and walking up the wide brick steps toward the massive double doors of the estate. Chloe turns her head, watching me with a mixture of terror and confusion. You have exactly 60 minutes to gather whatever personal belongings you can carry in your bare hands, I announce, turning back to look at her from the top of the porch. Because this house, the estate your mother so graciously hosted this little intervention in, was legally transferred into my charitable trust yesterday afternoon. Marcus signed away his equity when he signed that final prenuptial agreement. This property is now a corporate asset. Chloe lets out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest as if she has been physically struck. I have a private security firm arriving in exactly 1 hour. I continue, my voice echoing against the tall columns. They will be changing every single lock on the premises and securing the perimeter. Anyone found inside the house after that time will be arrested for criminal trespassing. I suggest you start packing, Chloe. The clock is ticking. I do not wait for her response. I do not stay to watch her break down into another fit of hysterical sobbing. I simply turn my back on the wreckage of the family that tried to destroy me. I step over the threshold, marching past the wailing women and the flashing red and blue lights. I reach into my tailored jacket, pulling out a heavy brass key and sliding it smoothly into the lock of the massive custom mahogany front door. The lock clicks with a heavy, satisfying thud. The massive custom mahogany door swings open, revealing the cavernous, immaculate foyer. It smells of Beatrice's suffocating floral perfume and Marcus's overpriced cologne. I leave the door wide open, letting the crisp night wind sweep through the corridor to air out the stench of their existence. I pull my phone from my tailored jacket pocket and press a single name on my speed dial. The instruction I give is exactly 3 words long. Execute Phase 2. Less than a minute later, the low, aggressive rumble of heavy diesel engines shakes the pavement. 3 massive matte black moving trucks turn off the main street and accelerate up the driveway, completely ignoring the decorative stone borders. They park directly on the pristine, manicured grass, chewing up the perfectly cut lawn with their heavy tires. The back ramps lower with a loud metallic clang. A highly coordinated team of towering, muscular black men steps out of the trucks. They are dressed in sleek, tactical black uniforms, with my Foundation U.S. corporate crest embroidered on the chest. They do not look like standard movers. They look like a specialized extraction team. They move with absolute military precision, completely bypassing the chaotic scene of the FBI arrests and marching directly up the porch steps into my house. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man with sharp, observant eyes and a heavy clipboard, stops right in front of me. I hand him a thickly bound, itemized manifest. Everything highlighted in red belongs to the former occupants. I instruct, my voice echoing clearly through the high ceilings of the grand estate. Clear it all out. Do not use boxes. Do not use bubble wrap. Put every single piece of it on the front lawn. The foreman gives a sharp nod and whistles to his crew. They swarm the house with breathtaking speed and absolute ruthlessness. I stand in the center of the foyer and watch the systematic dismantling of Beatrice and Marcus, as carefully curated illusion of wealth. The crew grabs Beatrice as faux antique vases from the hallway pedestals, marching them outside and dumping them unceremoniously onto the damp grass. They drag Marcus as garish velvet wingback chairs across the imported rugs, shoving them out the front door. They haul out the massive, ridiculous oil portrait of Beatrice that hung over the main staircase, treating it like a piece of cheap plywood and tossing it face down onto a patch of dirt. The pristine front lawn rapidly transforms into a chaotic graveyard of country club vanity. Designer coats, imported Italian leather shoes, and silk pillows rain down from the front balcony as the movers clear out the master bedroom. Marcus U.S. custom golf clubs are dumped into a tangled heap of metal and leather, clattering loudly against the brick walkway. The sheer volume of their fake, ostentatious possessions creates a mountain of garbage directly in front of the flashing red and blue police lights. Chloe watches from the driveway, her hands clamped over her mouth in sheer horror. She sees a stack of Marcus U.S. expensive tailored suits land in a muddy puddle of motor oil near the FBI vehicles. She tries to dart forward to salvage a cashmere throw, but one of the massive movers simply steps into her path, folding his arms and standing like an immovable brick wall until she cowers and retreats back to the Porsche. I walk slowly through the downstairs rooms, watching the space being violently purged of their toxic presence. Every single item removed feels like a literal physical weight lifting off my chest. The suffocating atmosphere of pretending to be less than I am, of playing the obedient, quiet wife to stroke a weak man's ego, simply vanishes into thin air. The house is finally breathing. I am finally breathing. I turn around and walk back out onto the front porch, standing at the top of the brick steps to survey the absolute finality of my work. Down on the driveway, the FBI agents are concluding their arrests. The lead agent has a firm, unyielding grip on Marcus's shoulder, forcefully guiding him toward the open back door of the armored SUV. Marcus is stumbling, his designer shirt ripped and stained with gravel dust and his own blood. Just before the agent pushes his head down to clear the doorframe, Marcus stops. He turns his head and looks up at me. His bruised, swollen eyes meet mine one last time. He expects to see sorrow. He expects to see rage. He expects to see some lingering shred of the desperate woman he thought he could endlessly manipulate and destroy for his own financial gain. He finds absolutely nothing. I raise my left hand, stepping forward so the harsh glare of the police cruisers perfectly illuminates the heavy platinum wedding band and the flawless 3-carat diamond on my finger. Marcus freezes against the agent's grip. He stares at the ring. It is the ultimate symbol of his fake marriage. The tool he used to trap me, the asset he thought guaranteed him a lifetime of generational wealth. I look him dead in the eye. My face is completely devoid of pity. It is the face of a woman who has successfully exterminated a parasite. I slide the ring off my finger. I do not throw it at him in a fit of dramatic rage. I do not fling it into the grass. I hold it out over the edge of the porch, perfectly aligned with the rusted iron grate of the storm drain built into the side of the brick walkway. I do not blink. I open my fingers. The heavy diamond drops. It hits the metal grate with a sharp, resonant ping that cuts through the noise of the idling truck engines. It bounces once and vanishes instantly into the dark, rushing water below, tumbling down into the filthy suburban sewer, exactly where it belongs. Marcus lets out a muffled, pathetic sound, a strangled gasp of total, absolute defeat. His shoulders collapse entirely. The agent shoves his head down and forces him into the back of the SUV, slamming the heavy armored door shut and cutting off his ruined face behind the dark tinted glass. I stand on the porch, looking out over the mountain of garbage on the lawn, the flashing sirens, and the weeping sister shivering by the luxury car. There are no tears burning in my eyes. There is no lingering heartbreak. I feel the cool night wind against my bare finger, and I feel an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of pure, absolute liberation. I turn my back on all of it. I walk across the threshold into the quiet, echoing space of my newly reclaimed fortress. I reach out and grab the edge of the massive mahogany door, pulling it toward me, until the heavy latch clicks firmly into place, shutting out the wreckage of their lives forever. The heavy metallic click of the front door lock echoes in the dark foyer, sealing the past away forever. That singular sound fades, melting seamlessly into the sharp, crisp rustle of freshly printed newspaper pages. Exactly 365 days have passed since that humid night on the driveway. The camera slowly pans across a polished oak desk, coming to rest on a scattering of local and national publications. The bold black headlines dominate the front pages. Buckhead elite brought down in federal fraud sweep. Tech CEO stripped of assets in historic embezzlement case. A fall from grace. My voice carries over the montage, steady, calm, and completely devoid of pity. They say the wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally catch traction, they possess the power to crush everything in their path. For Marcus and Chad, the destruction was absolute and entirely self-inflicted. The impenetrable brotherhood they thought they shared evaporated the very second they stepped into federal interrogation rooms. They turned on each other with the vicious predictability of starving animals. Marcus tried to pin the entire offshore embezzlement scheme on Chad, claiming he was a naive victim of a mastermind. Chad retaliated by releasing emails proving Marcus was the primary architect of the forged documents and the architect of the plan to siphon my inheritance. Their mutual betrayals did absolutely nothing to save them. Marcus was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The man who once threw a temper tantrum because his dry cleaner used the wrong amount of starch on his custom Italian collars now wears a scratchy, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. He spends his days assigned to the prison laundry, folding sheets and wiping down industrial machines. His elite golf club membership has been permanently replaced by a single hour of mandated recreation time in a concrete courtyard surrounded by razor wire. The generational wealth he tried to steal has been reduced to whatever meager funds his court-appointed attorney manages to deposit into his commissary account. He is a ghost of a man stripped of his ego and entirely forgotten by the society he worshipped. Chad received a much harsher sentence, 10 years without the possibility of early parole for massive systemic financial fraud and tax evasion. The brilliant tech visionary was exposed as nothing more than a glorified con artist. The federal government seized everything. The sprawling estate, the fleet of luxury vehicles, the offshore Cayman accounts, the encrypted server farms. Jessica, his loyal assistant turned star witness, provided the prosecution with a roadmap to his entire criminal enterprise. She walked away with full immunity and a quiet new life in another state. Chad is locked in a high-security facility, spending his nights staring at a concrete ceiling, calculating the exact mathematical probability of his own ruin. But neither of their sentences compare to the exquisite, agonizing punishment inflicted upon Beatrice. Federal prison would have been too simple for a woman like my former mother-in-law. Prison offers a strange sort of anonymity. Instead, Beatrice accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time for bribing a state official. Her sentence was 5 years of strict house arrest and forced financial restitution. For a woman whose entire existence was predicated on social superiority and public visibility, house arrest is a fate far worse than death. The federal courts mandated the complete liquidation of her assets to pay off the massive fines and the cascading debts Marcus and Chad left in their wake. The grand Buckhead estate was seized and sold at a public auction. I attended the estate sale purely as an observer, standing quietly in the back of the room, as Beatrice Youth's entire identity was auctioned off to the highest bidder. The antique Persian rugs, the imported crystal chandeliers, the silver serving sets she polished with such obsessive pride. All of it gone with the sharp strike of an auctioneer's gavel. Beatrice was forcefully evicted from the exclusive zip code she believed was her divine birthright. She now resides in a cramped ground-floor apartment in a decaying suburb 20 miles outside the city limits. The camera cuts to a stark visual of her new reality. The apartment has low popcorn ceilings and cheap linoleum floors that peel at the corners. The walls are paper thin, allowing the sounds of crying babies and blaring televisions from neighboring units to constantly seep into her living space. There is no manicured lawn, no towering brick pillars, no winding gravel driveway. Her view consists of a cracked asphalt parking lot and a flickering neon sign from a nearby convenience store. A bulky black GPS ankle monitor sits securely fastened above her swollen foot, a constant blinking reminder of her absolute disgrace. The financial ruin was only the beginning of her punishment. The social exile was the killing blow. Within 48 hours of her arrest, the board of directors at her prestigious country club convened an emergency meeting. They voted unanimously to permanently revoke her membership, citing a violation of the club U.S. morality clause. The official letter was delivered via certified mail, a document I know she read until the paper practically disintegrated in her hands. The women she spent 3 decades gossiping with, the very same women she conspired with at high tea and charity galas, dropped her with ruthless efficiency. In the rare instances she is granted permission to leave her apartment for approved medical appointments or grocery runs, she is treated like a contagious disease. Former friends cross the street the moment they see her shuffling toward them. They avert their eyes in the produce aisle, whispering behind their hands and shaking their heads in mock sympathy. She has become the ultimate cautionary tale for the old money elite. A laughingstock, a punchline traded over expensive cocktails. She sits alone in her cramped, humid apartment surrounded by cheap particle board furniture, staring at the blinking light of her ankle monitor. The aristocratic queen of Buckhead has been reduced to a pathetic, forgotten old woman trapped in a prison of her own making. Chloe fared no better. Stripped of Chad Yu's stolen wealth and completely unemployable due to her absolute lack of practical skills, she was forced to seek employment to survive. The woman who once mocked my ambition now works the cosmetic counter at a department store she used to patronize. She spends her days standing on her feet for 9 hours, forcing a polite smile as she applies foundation to the faces of women she used to invite to her dinner parties. Her prized Birkin bag was indeed seized by federal auditors to pay for her divorce attorney, just as I predicted. The camera smoothly transitions away from the grim realities of their downfalls, moving into a bright, sunlit office. The space is warm and inviting, filled with lush green plants, vibrant artwork, and the quiet hum of productive, focused energy. I sit behind a sleek, modern desk, reviewing a stack of grant applications for the Josephine Heritage Charitable Foundation. The past year has been a period of profound, brilliant growth. The foundation is thriving beyond my wildest expectations. The massive ski estate in Aspen is no longer a monument to empty vanity. Last month, we hosted our 3rd successful leadership retreat, flying in 40 underprivileged young women from across the country for a week of mentorship, career training, and empowerment. The $10 million my grandmother left me is safely locked in the ironclad trust, generating sustainable revenue that is actively changing lives. I am not simply managing an inheritance, I am building a legacy. Big Mama Josephine knew exactly what she was doing when she drafted that morality clause. She knew that wealth is not just about the accumulation of capital. True generational wealth is about intelligence, resilience, and the unyielding strength to protect what is rightfully yours. She handed me a sword disguised as a legal document, and I used it to sever the dead weight that was dragging me down. I signed the final approval on a comprehensive scholarship grant, setting the pen down with a satisfying click. I look out the wide window of my office, watching the city move and breathe under the bright afternoon sun. There is no fear left in my chest. There is no lingering shadow of the family that tried to break me. They underestimated my quiet nature, mistaking my patience for weakness. They believed their loud, arrogant entitlement would easily overpower my resolve. They played a desperate, reckless game for a prize they never truly understood. I did not just beat them at their own game. I dismantled the entire board. I stand up from my desk, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer. I walk out of the office, stepping into the bright hallway of a future I secured with my own 2 hands. The story of Marcus, Beatrice, Chad, and Chloe is over, permanently closed and archived in the dusty cabinets of federal courts and local gossip. My story, however, is just beginning. The warm sunlight filtering through my office window slowly dissolves, replaced by the blinding, brilliant reflection of winter sun against pure white snow. The air is crisp and biting, carrying the scent of pine and burning firewood. The camera pushes through a pair of heavy glass doors, gliding smoothly backward on a Steadicam. It circles me in a wide, continuous tracking shot. I am no longer standing on a hostile gravel driveway in suburban Atlanta. I am standing on the expansive cedar deck of the Aspen estate. The towering peaks of the Colorado Rockies rise majestically in the background, framing the massive log and glass structure that Big Mama Josephine secured for this exact purpose. There are no fake smiles here. There are no country club members clutching their pearls or arrogant men in tailored vests calculating their next fraudulent wire transfer. Instead, the deck is alive with vibrant, genuine energy. I am surrounded by the brilliant, dedicated staff of the Josephine Heritage Charitable Foundation. Inside the great room, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a group of teenagers is gathered around state-of-the-art soundboards and editing bays. They are disadvantaged Black youth from marginalized neighborhoods, kids who were repeatedly told they would never amount to anything. Now they are holding professional cameras, directing lighting setups, and learning the mechanics of digital media production. We transform the entire first floor of the lodge into a world-class media training center. It provides full scholarships, housing, and elite mentorship. And the best part of this entire endeavor is the funding source. That sprawling brick mansion in Atlanta, the one Beatrice cherished as the ultimate symbol of her Southern aristocracy, was fully liquidated 3 months ago. Once the title was legally cleared and the last of Marcus U.S. ruined suits were hauled to the local landfill, the foundation sold the property to a commercial developer at a massive premium. Every single dollar from that sale was directly injected into this Aspen project. Beatrice U.S. Vanity literally bought the cameras these kids are using to film their documentaries. I pull my thick wool coat tighter against the winter chill, stepping forward as the camera continues its slow, deliberate rotation around me. I look out at the snow-capped mountains and then look directly down the lens. They honestly thought they could push me to the edge. My voiceover begins steady and resonant, carrying the absolute weight of my victory. They thought they could throw me out onto the street simply because I refused to wear their fake aristocratic label. They looked at my quiet demeanor and calculated that I was an easy target. They thought they were dealing with a frightened girl who would simply fold under the pressure of their old money intimidation tactics. I take a slow step toward the edge of the deck, the snowy landscape stretching out infinitely before me. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They did not understand the blood running through my veins. They did not know that the women in my family never sit around waiting for other people to build a house for them. We buy the land ourselves, and we gladly bury anyone arrogant enough to try and take it from us. The camera tightens on my face, capturing the sharp, radiant glow of absolute triumph in my eyes. Never confuse a woman a silence with weakness, I state, my voice dropping into a smooth, razor-sharp whisper. We are never surrendering. We are just taking a moment to completely rearrange the chessboard. A foundation director steps out onto the deck, handing me a steaming crystal mug of spiced mulled wine. The rich aroma of cinnamon and clove mixes with the crisp mountain air. I take the mug, wrapping my fingers around the warm glass. I look back through the windows at the teenagers laughing and learning, building futures that no one can ever steal from them. Then, I turn back to the camera. I raise the glass of mulled wine in a slow, deliberate toast to the absolute perfection of poetic justice. A genuine, brilliant smile breaks across my face. A heavy, rhythmic bass line kicks in, followed immediately by the sharp, triumphant blast of a contemporary jazz saxophone. The brassy, energetic music swells, completely filling the cold mountain air. The image of me smiling on the deck holds for one final perfect second before the screen slowly fades to absolute black.